Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Better Informed Housing. My name's Margot Ruark, and today we have a special guest. We have attorney Kevin Cruz here from Better Informed Housing, which is an Illinois nonprofit organization. And today we're going to talk about fair housing issues. But before we do that, I just want to remind everyone that you can watch this program streaming online at cantv.org/hotline. And at any time during this program, if you want to ask our expert a question, the number will be flashed at the bottom of the screen from time to time. It's 312-738-1060. So welcome, Kevin. You're with
Hi.
Better Informed Housing, and you
Yes.
are a fair housing attorney. What is that all about?
All right. Well, fair housing is pretty self-explanatory. It's how we give housing. How fair housing is. You think about it as leveling the playing field. Now, in the public, we all know that discrimination is still pretty much alive and well, and the fair housing laws were enacted in order to level the playing field, just to make sure that people are getting the housing that they need and not based on any kind of protected status.
Oh, okay. Well, protected status, now, what do you mean by that?
So,
Exactly.
so protected statuses are identifiers. They're what make somebody unique. So, for example, national origin. Me coming from the Philippines, that would make me a protected member of a protected class because of my nationality as being Asian American. So, in the federal world, there's a few protected classes such as race, national origin, sex, that kind of thing. And as you move closer to the local level, there are more protected classes. So, for example, in Illinois, a protected class would actually be somebody with a protective order from a judge in terms of housing law in general. And in the city of Chicago, there are even more protections based on protected classes. So, for example, here in Chicago, a source of income is a protected class. Gender identity is a protected class.
So that means in the fair housing context, a landlord cannot ask a person about where their source of income is, or they can and they cannot factor. How does that factor into the landlord-tenant relationship?
Well, in a nutshell,
Yeah.
you can't deny somebody housing based on protected class, or
Okay.
treat them differently because of protected class. So, for example, if I had a disability and it required some kind of accommodation, so to speak, a landlord couldn't necessarily tell me no flat out. Here's a good example actually. Service animals. If I had a disability such as post-traumatic stress disorder that a medical professional had prescribed an emotional support animal, I could have that support animal in a building. If, in this example, let's say that the landlord allowed pets in the building, I would be allowed to have that dog, because of the laws. What it does is it levels the playing field. So, if everybody else is allowed to have a dog, I should also be allowed to have a dog.
Okay.
So,
All right.
that's kind of how it factors in there. Now, there's a couple caveats to that situation, of course, but I'll just kind of keep it simple.
Okay. So I wanted to give our viewers just a note here about how they can get a hold of you. And we have your contact information here at Better Informed Housing, which is a not-for-profit organization. We're located at 218 North Jefferson Street, Suite 103 in Chicago. And the phone number to Better Informed Housing is 312 775-0980. And the website is foreclosuredefenselawoffice.com. Now, getting used to the control switches here still. I wanted to also remind our viewers, if they wanted to call in and talk about any and all things fair housing, to call the number that's at the bottom of the screen, which is 312-738-1060. So talk about some of the cases that you've come up against in your travels here. If there's anything that stands out, an example that you could share without, naming names or having those personal identifiers. But if you could share with us the kinds of things that come across your path.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess to kind of piggyback off of the whole accommodation animal issue, one of the most recent cases that I worked on dealt with a lady that had an emotional support animal. And it wasn't just for her, it was actually for her 2 kids who were autistic. And they had a service animal that was a pit bull. So the landlord took a lot of issue with that because this animal was a pit bull. Now, there was technically a no clause policy, a no pets clause policy in place at this particular development, but the tenants were allowed to have dogs kind of as, on the side, kind of just turned the other way, so to speak. And this lady was getting letters from the landlords and the management saying, you can't have this dog. It's a danger to the tenants at the building because it's a pit bull. And she responded by saying, well, I need this dog for a companion animal to my 2 autistic children. Long story short, the case went to the courts when the landlord filed an eviction action against our tenant here. And I represented this tenant, of course, and her 2 children in this case, and the ultimate outcome was that we settled it, of course. But had it gone to trial, we would have had a pretty strong case against the management. There are a few caveats when it comes to reasonable accommodation. So, for example, if the pit bull, the dog, in this scenario was actually a very sweet dog. It wasn't violent at all. I mean, it was a puppy, so it was a little rambunctious, but it wasn't a violent dog. It never attacked anyone. It would bark here and there and, do things that other dogs would otherwise do. But for the most part, this dog was a nice dog. Had the situation been such that the dog was a violent dog, where the dog's, bitten people, it's attacked other people, it was threatening other people, that kind of thing, then the tables would have been turned a little bit, because in this instance, if she asked for a reasonable accommodation to keep the dog, the reasonable accommodation would not actually be reasonable.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that the dog poses a direct and imminent danger to other tenants of the building. So a reasonable accommodation isn't something that is just freely granted. You kind of have to show the reasons why you need a reasonable accommodation. So in this instance, it was because we had 2 autistic children that needed support animal.
Okay.
So if she had had it just as a pet, then there's really no need for a support animal. In this instance, there was a need. So, and she actually had a doctor write her a prescription saying that, having this animal stimulates and keeps the children calm. So it's necessary to do that instead of, prescribing them medication that would do that, on a chemical basis. They kind of use this as kind of like a holistic remedy, kind of. So But in this case, we were able to settle it, and we came to an amicable resolution on all sides. But had we proceeded to trial, we would have had a pretty good case there.
I want to thank you, Kevin. I want to just remind people of how they can get a hold of you. And you're at Better Informed Housing, which is an Illinois not-for-profit corporation located at 218 North Jefferson Street in Chicago. And there's more information on the website foreclosuredefenselawoffice.com. Now, I know that one of the kind of the big burning issues today is, especially in these times, is immigration status. We have a lot of talk in the media today about immigrants and migrants and refugees from different countries wanting to come in. And we read about it in a lot of different on the internet and in the papers, that there has been some issues here with where are these folks going to live.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, immigration is kind of always a pretty big issue. I know because of the presidential elections that are coming up, it's been particularly a lively source of discussion, especially among certain presidential hopefuls. And it is an issue, and the long and the short of it is landlords really cannot ask for any kind of immigration related questions. Like, they can't say, if they ask, are you a U.S. citizen, they kind of have to ask everybody if they're a U.S. citizen. Okay. So, for example, if I applied for a place and you applied for a place, and the application for me asked, are you a U.S. citizen, whereas, for you, that didn't have anything on there, then there's some evidence to show that I'm being treated differently.
I see.
And that's kind of the crux of any fair housing case, really, is whether or not somebody's been treated differently because of protected status. So, if me being Asian American was given a different application vis-a-vis someone else, then there's there's a disconnect there. There's evidence showing that I'm being treated differently because of who I am. And with regard to immigration, national origin is a protected status. So if somebody feels that they're being discriminated based on the fact that they're Mexican or Cambodian or Vietnamese or because they're African American, in the application of in the process for applying for a place, in the treatment services, that kind of thing, at the place where they're currently living, then there's an issue that needs to be addressed.
So it's what I hear you saying, and correct me if I misunderstood this, that a landlord can't ask for, can I see your passport? Are you legal? Unless they ask everybody, are you legal? Are you legally here? Are you a citizen?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's important to know if you're ever faced with that situation. Now, how about having, let's say, a person comes to a landlord and they don't speak English. So it's obvious they're fresh out of the from somewhere, and must a landlord provide a translator for them in order to negotiate their own lease, or how does that work?
Well, the landlord doesn't have to provide a translator to negotiate a lease. It would help if somebody had a translator. If the landlord refused to work with someone's translator, then there would be an issue there, because there's some evidence there that again shows some kind of preferential treatment, to where if I say I don't want to work with a translator, I only take people here that speak English. There's some discrimination there, and again, there's an issue that needs to be addressed, because if landlords aren't willing to work with translators, there's that in and of itself is evidence of some kind of preferential treatment of a certain class of people versus another.
Okay. Let's go to our information again on how people can get a hold of Kevin Cruz here at Better Informed Housing, which is an Illinois nonprofit organization located at 218 North Jefferson, Suite 103 in Chicago, Illinois. The website is foreclosuredefenselawoffice.com. So tell us another of a good example that you've come across in your legal experience.
All right. Well, I guess to kind of piggyback off the immigration national origin kind of thing that we were just talking about, let's kind of switch gears now and talk about something that doesn't have to deal with the acquisition of housing. Mm-hmm. So in one of the cases that I took on, the issue was that a family who was of Mexican-American descent that was living in a building that was predominantly Pakistani, Middle Eastern tenants was being treated differently because they were not, from the same area as the other residents of a building. Mm-hmm. This lady was living in an apartment with 3 kids, and her roof actually collapsed. Oh. And the landlord pretty much refused to fix it. What he did was he put up a tarp over the hole, and he just kind of left it that way for about 6 months. The other tenants of the building, who were of the same descent or national origin as the landlord, had brand new appliances. They had granite countertops. They had stainless steel appliances. Meanwhile, this poor lady was having to deal with appliances, from the 1980s, and her apartment had serious problems with mold, pests, that kind of thing. So it was very strange that the only non-Pakistani, Afghanistani, Middle Eastern family in this building had the worst apartment. So the landlord had finally had enough of it and filed an eviction suit against her. Mm-hmm. So, we stepped in, and we were able to provide some help for this woman in the form of a settlement, because at that point we had amassed a lot of information showing that other tenants had all these nice fixtures and things in their apartment, whereas this lady who was of Mexican American descent had things that were a lot less nice than everyone else, which again shows preferential treatment.
Yeah. If you have a question about fair housing, please call the number that's at the bottom of your screen. That's 312-738-1060. This is your chance. This is your opportunity to ask the burning questions. Now, I have a question here.
Yeah.
What about like credit history and all of that? Is that okay for landlords to get your social security number and run a credit history, and they're into all your business and everything like that, just to rent an apartment? And if you pay them cash, you pay the security deposit up front. What's the problem? What is that? I mean, is that legal?
That in and of itself, like on its face, is legal. Okay. That's okay.
Okay. I was hoping to get out of that.
Right. Now if you have someone who comes in who's, a certain class, and you ask them what their credit history is versus somebody who comes in and you don't ask them what their credit history is, then there's preferential treatment, right? So there's always a catch. But if you're going to deny somebody based on past credit history, that's actually okay. Okay. Because credit is something that affects everyone, right? It's not something that's intrinsically unique to an individual. So if I have bad credit, I can't. That's not a protected class. So if that were the case, it's something that everybody has. Everybody has a credit history. So if somebody were to tell me, you can't rent here because your credit score is too low, then that's actually acceptable as long as it's not attached to another protected status.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we just have a few minutes left here, Kevin. Is there anything else that you want to add to the mix here? Some closing thoughts?
Yeah, the issue of fair housing actually isn't very well known, unfortunately, amongst other people. So my advice is to just kind of be aware of what your rights are as a person here. And if you feel like you're being treated based on any kind of, identifier that you have, you might have a pretty decent case on your hands.
Okay. We do have a caller. Caller,
yes.
Thank you for calling. You have a comment or question?
Yes, good evening. First, I wanted to say that who should get public housing first? Or someone that has never worked a day in their life, ex-felon, or a veteran. Because it doesn't seem that the veterans are getting a fair shake. And I was wondering why you guys never bring the veterans up. There's always somebody, a lady with 27 kids,
Mm-hmm.
or a guy that's been in jail 89 times. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think the caller's question was why people who are veterans aren't being necessarily given a fair shake at these public housing programs. Mm. I personally don't know, because that's something that the public housing organizations deal with. So organizations like the Chicago Housing Authority, the Veterans Administration, that kind of thing, they actually have programs that have these housing subsidiary or housing voucher programs, and it's actually up to them how they choose to award these vouchers. Now, typically, these vouchers are given based on need. So it's actually up to these providers to, decide who gets these housing choice vouchers. Now, a few years ago, we had an issue with some Section 8 voucher holders being put up in very expensive luxury high-rise apartments. In the wake of that, I understand that the Chicago Housing Authority has actually opened up more housing choice vouchers for people to use. So my advice is to just kind of apply for the programs that accept veterans. For example, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has the Veterans Administration Supportive Housing Program, otherwise known as HUD-VASH, that specifically tailor their programs to veterans, and especially veterans with disabilities.
Okay, we have a caller. You have a quick comment or question for Kevin? Oh, I think we lost our caller.
Hello?
Yes, hello. You have a quick comment?
I've got a quick question for Kevin.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, am I on?
Yes.
Great. I was wondering, I own some properties that are rental properties in the city of Chicago, and I've got several leases that are coming due, and they do not want to renew. But I was told that it's a requirement in the city that I have to allow Section 8 within my units, and I'm not familiar with that. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to Section 8, but I just don't know if I want to be forced to have to do that as a property owner or landlord.
Okay. Quickly, Kevin, can you respond to that?
The short answer is yes, actually. The City of Chicago Fair Housing Ordinance under Section 5-8-030 actually states that you cannot turn somebody down based on their status as a Section 8 recipient. You may,
Okay. Well, we might have to do a follow-up program on that, Kevin. I just want to thank you for coming in today. It's too bad that we don't have more time.
Right.
But
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Until next time, thank you.